This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC here, specifically Radio 2, where assorted sinful members of the public have for many years been telling their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception. Seeking forgiveness from you, the parish of Radio 2, with Joe and Sister Bobby here, waiting to dispense justice and mercy.
And this week's confession collection includes a sinful sausage story, Come Fry With Me, Kath's confession, You've Placed a Hill in My Heart, and Em's tale, Sign of the Crimes. Plus, we uncover another classic confession from the crypt that you've requested.
But we start this week's podcast with this splendid confession from Joan entitled Empire Fate of Mind.
Please be seated.
Tonight's comes from Joan. Okay, this is a splendid tale.
How do you spell that?
It's Joa. Struggled with this before. Spelling Joan is very straightforward. It's Joan.
However, none of us could do it earlier on.
Right, see, normally he tells me off for not being able to spell. How come Joe's allowed, but I'm not allowed?
What are you talking about?
Anyway.
I'm a terrible speller. I haven't ever corrected anyone about their spelling.
Oh, years! 2.5 years!
Right, we can go down the pub after the show. We should sort that out there.
Nostalgic, so nostalgic. So Joan, Joan, says, Joe, Simon and Bobby, my confession goes back 18 years or so, and I'm prompted to send this in due to the weather and the current time of year, because this is primary school fete season. Fete, obviously. I will start by setting the scene. It's a Friday night and we've got friends round for a barbecue and a few drinks. My daughter was about 5 at the time and I'd agreed to take her to the fete the next afternoon. No problem with that. I'm sure we've all been there. A couple of drinks, but we didn't stop at 2 or 3, if I'm honest. And the next morning my head struggled to get off the pillow it was attached to. But having a young child meant that dying wasn't going to be an option, so I forced my way to the kitchen in the hope that tea and a paracetamol breakfast might be just what the doctor ordered. It was then that my daughter reminded me of the fete that afternoon. I'm sure it's fine. I'll be okay by then, I was thinking. And then she hit me with the bombshell. What about the cake? She said. What cake? I replied, trying desperately to remember what I'd agreed to. The one you were making for the competition. You said you would, and I've entered it already, so I have to take in a cake. At this point, she handed me the screwed-up note that I'd signed a month ago at least, agreeing to enter a cake. I work full-time, I exclaimed. I must have forgotten. Her face started to well up, and I started to feel as sick as the proverbial dog. Everyone else's mum has made a lavish cake. Obviously, some dads will have made the cakes as well, but different times, Bobby. I looked in the cupboards. I had nothing to offer. This just made her sheer condemnation of me even worse, and my heart sank. What a terrible mother. Right, I'll go off to the shop. I'll buy all the stuff I need. Anyway, to be honest, the thought of baking in my state was not an appealing one. But the shop was brilliant in that I found a ready-made sponge for 99p by a famous brand. Oh, that'll do nicely, I thought. I put some ready-made icing on it and job done. I was on a mission now, and when I got back home, I remembered I had a vase of cut flowers due to be thrown out. They were almost dead, and I thought, well, this could be the decoration. Very avant-garde. Yes, a sponge with icing with dead flowers on. Nowadays you'd call it a Morrissey cake or something like that, but anyway, it was just a cake with dead flowers. Anyway, by now the paracetamol and copious amounts of tea and biscuits had started to kick in, and I was actually quite proud of my effort. Mum, that's amazing! How did you do that? I thought, never mind, I said, never mind, off we go. And we went to school armed with the cheating masterpiece. But at the gates I was duly met by, let's call her, Mum of the Year. You know, the one in the shiny 4x4, always immaculate. She got out of her car, leather seating, with a hand-cut cake made from homemade sponge, perfectly shaped and cut out into cars and buildings, with plastic men and carefully selected decorations. There was a car that was actually in a garage, all made out of sponge. This must have been a week's worth of sweat and tears by my calculation. Well, I just wanted to turn around and go home and burst into tears. But thanks to my daughter, that wasn't happening either. So we trudged into school and entered the cake, and I hoped that that would be the end of it. But no, after completing every tombola and every raffle and every hook the fish something or other and find a whatnot game and guess the number of aniseed twists in the teacher, we saw some cakes on display. Not just any old cake. They're all the winning entries in the homemade cake competition. And not only that, my cheat was on show with the decorative flowers now breathing their last gasp of life. And to my absolute horror, but my daughter's sheer delight, we had only gone and won it. First place and Mum of the Year, a loser, in second place. So not only had we won, it had also been sold to someone for 10 quid.
Wow.
Someone had bought my cake. At this point, we left without looking back, fearing we'd be rumbled. My daughter would be thrown out of school and me dying of shame. Mum, I'm so proud of you, she said. You're the best mum ever. Yes, I was thinking, the best cheating mum ever. Therefore, Father Simon, I would like to say sorry to the school, sorry to the Mum of the Year, loser, the poor soul that spent £10 on a 99p sponge covered in dead flowers, and anyone else I've forgotten. Please forgive me, I don't think I've messed up quite as bad since, and sincerely regret what I did. I suspect there's going to be a lot of people saying, yes, actually, I've done that. Yes, I do admit I was supposed to home bake this thing, and I went out and bought a jar of Sainsbury's marmalade, or any other supermarket marmalade, put my own label on it, and we won a competition. Anyway, it's Joan's confession. What do you say, Joe?
Who hasn't done this or resorted to something similar?
Have
I
you?
think.
What have you done?
I paid my daughter to. I've got two daughters. One is big and one is little.
Yeah.
So one's 26, one is 9. One is a really amazing cook. And I got to that position where I hadn't made the cake, and it was like, you have to make the cake. I have to win the competition. And my daughter is a food stylist, so obviously I'm going to turn to India
Very
and
good.
just go, can you just make this cake, please? And the other day we were looking
And you
back.
paid her?
Of course, insider. Yeah, no, we were looking at some photographs the other day, and Coco just went, "Oh, my sister is just like the best sister in the world," and obviously dagger to my heart because I'm not the best mum in the world, but needs
I'm
must.
sure you are.
No, I'm not. But if you're in this situation, then of course you can do something like this. The only thing I would say, there's something to learn from this. That'll teach you to have your wits about you when you sign any form given to you by a child. Always read the small print. Always check what you're signing. It gets you into scrapes.
That Friday night barbecue before the school fete, though, it's always going to cause trouble.
Lethal.
Bobby, what do you say there?
Well, the thing is, it was brought on by too much vino or something. So there's a little bit of me that goes, okay. But you see, the thing is you got up, you got there, like you said, is you adapted. It's, it's like most things in life. When things don't work out, which is mostly every day, you have to do something else, and you did it. And actually, I feel a little bit sorry for Mum of the Year, because even Mum of the Year very often is not having a nice time of it most of the time. I think there's veneers for Mum of the Year. So I feel really sorry for her that she didn't win, because that might have been her one thing she really, really wanted to do that year. So I feel a little bit sorry for Mum of the Year. But I'm actually going to say...
I don't like Bobby sometimes. Really don't like Bobby.
Just saying. I'm just saying, you raised £10. So that was good. So it cost you £10, you raised £10. I'm going to say I can forgive you that.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's confession is anonymous. So there's absolutely no name or anything, so it's a completely anonymous one. Always very suspicious. Father Mayo and your holy quorum. That's you guys. I'm writing to beg forgiveness for an in-flight misdemeanour for which I am suffering unspeakable guilt. There'll be quite a few of these. When I was 12, I travelled as an unaccompanied minor from the UK to Australia to visit my cousins. I was naturally very excited. The first leg sped past in a haze of comics, sweets, and a movie. I had a window seat. I ignored everybody else. On the second leg, though, I was seated next to an middle-aged lady, and apart from the pleasantries, we barely spoke for the whole journey. She had books to read, and as I recall, papers to write. She was worried. She was stressed. Now, 24 hours in the air is enough for anyone, let alone a 12-year-old. When I'd run out of my own entertainment, I paced around the plane for hours, tried to sleep. I began to look forward inordinately to the arrival of food on trays with small bags of salt and pepper. Such extravagance. So it was that in our last 6 hours, as we made landfall over Australia's northern coast, much to my relief, breakfast was finally served. I selected the big breakfast, bacon and egg, with all the trimmings. Bit like you at Latitude, really.
Very much.
Rejecting any lightweight muesli muffin combos. Back in my day, 12-year-olds never chose muesli. However, as you can imagine, the food had had a long journey from Dubai, and the bacon and sausages in particular were not in peak form, both looking a rather drab shade of grey, which is almost a Procol Harum song, but not quite. About this time, my lady companion popped to the loo, and we did that usual routine of stand up, sit down, squeeze past the other person. While she was away, I set about eating my breakfast more vigorously in its small plastic tray with my small plastic knife and fork. Since I had more elbow room, I could really get into hacking at the sickly-looking chipolata. However, to my dismay, whilst I did manage to cleave the said processed meat product in two, at the same moment, in one swift action, the sausage left my tray table and, executing a perfect arc, landed in the handbag of the lady who had been sitting next to me. I have to tell you, she had an expensive leather bag full of her travel essentials. Now, somehow, my sausage had somehow found its way into its depths. I couldn't exactly fumble in her bag to retrieve it for fear of being branded a thief. Nor could I confess to her when she got back, so I stayed mum, as we used to say, and tried to distract myself for the rest of the journey, assuming that my sausage would be discovered at any minute. But no, it remained hidden. Now, as you may know, Australia has very strict quarantine laws due to the very unique wildlife that they have there. Anyone who's travelled to Australia and New Zealand know that this kind of thing goes down very badly. So you can imagine my alarm when I realised, excuse me, that the arrival hall was swarming with trained beagle sniffer dogs and immigration officers, and worse still, signs about the fines that would be imposed on anybody trying to import meat products of any kind. So basically, it boils down to this. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness for the financial loss and distress that was caused and the shock caused when this woman came to present her passport for inspection, only to find a sausage was stuck to it. These officials take this kind of thing very seriously. I hope she wasn't detained for too long, or that the fine wasn't too great a burden, but she did look very worried when she was taken away. I should have said something, but I didn't. In my defence, I was only 12 and was afraid that my flying sausage story was too strange to be believed. Well, you know, what I'm not quite sure is why anonymous confessor. I thought the easiest thing would have been to say, by the way, my sausage just flew into your handbag. But I guess when you're 12, rational thinking is not necessary. And I get why he didn't go rummaging to get it out, because it definitely would have looked as though he was trying to nick some money.
That wouldn't have looked good. That would not have looked good
at all. What do you say, Joan?
No, I think it's just... You'd be terrified if you were a 12-year-old child, 12-year-old boy, sat next to a grown-up lady who obviously wasn't particularly warm and friendly, and maybe she didn't particularly like children, so the idea that a child would have stuck a sausage in her handbag wouldn't have gone down particularly well. No. But I'm definitely going to forgive Anonymous, just because I feel sorry for him being a 12-year-old boy, just sat there.
You've done this on purpose.
Yes. And I can't believe that she would have got into any trouble, because it's just one sausage stuck to a passport.
Well,
no harm done.
Well, I'm not quite sure about that. Anyway, Bobby.
Oh, I'm lucky enough to do that trip so many times and arrive on the other side with dogs coming at you. They're really well trained to sniff out the difference between a banana and a sausage. So if you've got
well, I can do that.
Yeah, but not.
You don't need a dog to do that, do you? We can all smell the difference between a banana and a sausage.
They are brilliant animals, working animals. And I'm sure that I've had things in my bag and they've gone, "Are you trying to take that apple?" And I was going to eat it later, and they go, "No, come on, hand it over." So I think that, look, they know the difference between someone trying to smuggle in things. So I think it should have been all right. Also, I don't think you're aware when you're 12 of what happens at the other side and how careful you have to be. I don't think you're that aware. So I don't think you've really got anything to forgive. And also, you feel guilt. You feel bad. And there it is. You feel guilt. You feel ashamed. You've confessed. You are forgiven.
Madam, do you know there's a chipolata stuck to your passport?
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was an anonymous tale, Come Fry With Me, which caused some of you to text in your puns inspired by the sausage story.
Simon Moody in Leeds. It's lucky there was only one sausage and not loads, end to end, otherwise she might have been arrested for a string of offences.
Aha!
People have had a lot of fun with this one. Where was that? So this is from Chris. Confessions. Where was the lady going with her passport? Frankfurt?
Very good. Okay, that's better. That's in the lead.
Jenny and Sean, sounds like a porky to us, Simon.
Okay, that's
Shall I
in
move
third
on?
place.
Made them very happy anyway.
Yes, I
Made
think
them
so.
very happy.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Still to come on this week's podcast, we have the confession that involved this horror scene.
A very rapid retreat to her vehicle, a slamming of the door and screeching of tyres as she fled, glancing in her mirror to see the hammer-wielding lunatic running down the lane after her. But before we hear what happened next, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you, the parish, have been saying in the last 7 days. Joe, what is it that's caught your eye?
Well, I've got this confession here, and it's from Joseph, which we didn't have time for on the radio show, but I thought we should mention because it might feature our oldest confessor yet.
Okay.
So should we hear from him? I know it's been a long time coming, but I really must apologise to the lads who were playing football on the large Clubmoor recreation ground in 1945. I have to say sorry for stealing their ball, or their case ball, as we used to call it in these days in Liverpool, or even just a casey sometimes. It happened like this. I was about 9 years old at the time, and in those days, we'd kick anything. So tin cans, stale bread loaves. It didn't even have to be round-shaped. There were balls around, of course, but these would be old tennis balls. Rubbish, really. Nothing like a casey. In other words, a proper leather football. It was a Sunday morning, and I hopped on a tram where we lived in Norris Green and got off at the Rec to watch some football. There were about 10 lads on the large Rec in two teams, with coats for goalposts, of course, and they were playing with a casey. I was fascinated. It must have been getting on for half-time because they soon stopped playing, and one lad kicked the ball behind one of the goals, and the teams gathered together in the middle of the pitch for bits of orange. I then went towards the ball, and I started to gently kick it. In fact, I began to slowly nudge it towards the exit of the park, fully expecting someone to give me an earful and tell me to clear off and leave the ball alone. But nothing happened. Nobody, apparently, noticed me. So I was outside the park, and before you know it, I was on the 14 tram back home with my stolen property. My casey. When I got home and I showed it to my two younger brothers, they were delighted. But when my dad saw it, he didn't believe for a second my lie, so he confiscated it. Well, he put it somewhere for a few weeks and then relented and gave it to us. We played with it for quite a few years with no remorse. So if there are any guys around now, they'll be certainly probably in their 80s, who wondered how they were unable to play the second half of their football game at the end of the war on the Clubmoor Rec. Well, now they know. I must say to them, I'm really sorry I messed up your game, and again offer my rather belated but sincere apology. How lovely is that?
So that must make Joseph 82.
Is he our oldest confession?
Well, there was a confession many years ago, which was a confession that happened during the Second World War. So
actually, you're right, yeah.
I think probably not, but I think we have to be quite stern on this because
Oh, sorry.
Because it is obviously theft.
Well, I think when you're little, and if you really, really love something very much, if you really, really love
that makes
football,
it okay, does it?
No, it doesn't. But you can see the drive and the passion, and you haven't had anything, and you've just gone through a war, and you probably haven't even had a blackjack.
You can't bring
for
the war
17
into it.
years. Well, I think there was difficult times, and I wonder whether they did see him take it, and I wonder if they did have a spare, and they just went, oh no, you know what? Let him go free.
Do you believe in fairies?
Yes.
And so do I.
If I broke into your car and helped myself to all your cassettes,
Yeah.
would that be okay?
No, but that's different, isn't it? First of all, you broke into my
No, I
car.
just
Don't
really
touch my
want them.
car. And secondly, no, you can't. But that's different because you're
It's
not
not the same
9.
thing.
Actually, you do look like you're 9 today because you've wet your hair and you do look like you've just come
There you
from a
go.
swimming pool.
Excellent.
I think he's borrowed some gel from someone today.
No, there's no gel in it at all. It's just...
You look lovely in that kind of,
Thank you. You're
sisterly way.
backtracking now.
How can it be so vertical when there's nothing in it?
I don't know. It's just...
Dirt! He hasn't washed it for a very long time.
Yeah, that's what. It's grime and grease. Anyway, so Joseph, thank you very much indeed. I don't suppose you can beat that, Bobby?
Well, maybe not, but I have one of our occasional mini confessions.
Oh, they're good.
From a younger listener, and this one is from Melissa, and she is 11 years old. Simon, Joe and Bobby, and your hopefully forgiving friends, I seek forgiveness for something that happened when I was 7. My twin brother had recently discovered the delights of Pokemon cards and had more than 50 cards by the time we turned 7.5. One day, my brother realised he had no pocket money as my nan took us home from school. I, however, had my pocket money. He instantly started badgering me. Lily, can I borrow some of your money? Just like £2, he asked.
Good accents, good acting.
Now, we only get £3 pocket money every week, so I wasn't entirely happy. That was until I remembered I had my fake £2 coin on me that I had gotten from a joke shop. So I handed it over to Tom and went to pay. However, my nan noticed the fake money before he went to pay and he got in loads of trouble, but he never told on me. I now seek forgiveness for the fact that he had no pocket money for a month, and also seek forgiveness from the cash assistant who had seen the entire thing. So do we forgive?
No.
Are you meanie?
Horrible sisters.
Horrible sisters.
This is a story of a horrible sister. Come on.
I think it's lovely that her lovely, lovely brother didn't tell on her and he went without pocket money. Actually, Lily, what I think you should have done is I think you should have handed over your pocket money as he didn't get you into trouble, but you didn't share your pocket money, did you?
No.
Not forgiven.
I think that's about right. I think she comes out of it very badly indeed. And she probably needs to send us money.
Or Pokemon cards.
No, actually,
hang on, how old was she?
we've still got loads of Pokemon cards
She's
in our
11
house anyway.
now. We've got
okay.
loads of Doctor Who cards as well. Just today I was clearing out my daughter's bedroom and I was like, I should just throw them in the bin, and
No.
I couldn't bring myself to do it. No.
We've still got a shiny Scheherazade
Have you?
in the kitchen. Which
Who's that?
It's a
Oh
Pokemon.
my gosh.
Oh, was it a Pokemon?
Yeah, it's worth, I don't know.
50p?
Might be worth nothing at all.
No, but not just any Pokemon, is it? Charizard
It's a shiny.
and a shiny Charizard.
A shiny
was,
Scheherazade is like the best thing, I
Okay.
think, as I remember.
Oh no, it really was, yeah.
Anyway, I forgot Melissa was 11, so you're quite right. So, Melissa, you're only 11, and so therefore we think you're great, and so therefore you're slightly forgiven. Is that okay?
There you go,
Yep.
Melissa, I'm on your side.
Finally, from the Parish Notice Board, this from Tony. I just wanted to say how much I'm enjoying the Confessions podcast, much to the confusion of my fellow rail passengers who stare at me, trying to stifle my giggles whilst I'm stuck next to their armpits on the train. Keep up the great work.
Very nice.
Well, hey, Tony, thank you very much indeed. You can rate us on iTunes. It's very nice. Thank you very much.
Isn't that always the best thing, to be stuck at armpit level when you're on the train and there is no escape, there's no way out, you're just kind of stuck there inhaling armpits. Anyway, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, you might have a confession of your own or you want to request a classic one, then all you have to do is email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Now, for the sleazy time that we have, this is the dodgy bit of the notice board, the non-compliant confessions that we could never get away with if they were read out onto the radio. Confessions from shameless people who clearly have no moral compass. What they need is a bobby in their life, but somehow they've lost their bobby and they don't really know where they are, and they're all adrift in a sea of sin.
Is that what they need?
Something like
they
that.
They need me in their life.
For example, Tim. We initially enjoyed your holiday tale of travelling on a tourist train through a French cave with your 6-year-old son. However, you let yourself down, Tim, when the train stopped and the lights went out, and you thought it would be funny to scare your son by telling him the train had broken down, even though you knew that this was all part of the ride. Well, the man in the carriage in front didn't think it was so amusing when he later got off the train and found in his hood a combination of croissant, chocolate milk and Cocoa Pops that your son had regurgitated. And he'd vommed in the hood. So frightened was he.
That's awful.
That's a thing.
Horrible father.
We could have read that one. I was fine. Also having his hopes dashed in his quest for forgiveness is Jerry, who one night was staying back at his mum and dad's after years away following a night out. After a particularly heavy night at the pub, Jerry couldn't be bothered going all the way to the toilet and decided his bedroom window was as good a place as any to relieve himself. So imagine his horror when the next day he went downstairs to discover a half-built conservatory recently built below his bedroom window that he didn't know was there, and a suspicious puddle. Did Jerry own up? Of course he did not, but he did blame Sam the cat and shockingly got away with his disgusting.
I don't know how he got away with it because it smells different from cats.
Does it?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. I'm not going to tell you how I know this, but it definitely doesn't smell like cat.
How do you know that?
Because I think cat smells like cat.
It's very distinct, isn't it?
Yes, like dog
Catty,
smells like dog, yes.
a disgusting smell.
Jerry smelt of Jerry.
Anyway, but I think I forgive.
I think we could have read that out on air. I don't see why it's in the
think
podcast,
that would have
really.
been fine. And forgiveness is also forthcoming for Paul, who, in the days when you could cash a cheque in supermarkets, thought it'd be fun to play a prank on his friend Stud, who'd left his chequebook. Who has a nickname like Stud? He left his chequebook lying around their shared house. Stud, as he did every month, took his cheque to be cashed by the slightly grumpy lady who worked at the kiosk in the supermarket. But instead of handing Stud his money, the lady reacted furiously and soon had him frog-marched out by security, yelling at him as he left. Turns out the Paul had written a little message on the back of Stud's cheque, making a very indecent proposal to the cashier, one that certainly couldn't be repeated on a family show.
Not forgiven.
Not acceptable, huh?
No.
Anyway, they're quite funny, and we should have read them out. But anyway, they've made their way into the dodgy bit of the notice board. If you've got something for us, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Yeah, it's time now to get back to the confessions that did make the cut this week. So we have M from Kent's simple story, Sign of the Crimes, which featured a scene straight out of a horror movie.
The Confessions Podcast.
Right, so tonight's tale then, gather around, here comes another confession. This one comes from M from Kent. We're just saying the letter M. Thank you, M. Dear Father Simon, Joe, and the ever-compassionate collective, I seek forgiveness for an innocent incident that occurred in the summer of 2016. To set the scene, for the previous 6 years, I had volunteered 2 weeks of my summer to help a local dance school put on an extravagant ballet. The production takes over what is otherwise a quiet seaside village, turning their village hall into a miniature West End theatre with full professional set and lights. Local children from the dance school have the chance to rehearse and dance alongside professionals in 5 shows, which have grown in popularity and regularly reach audiences of 600 over the run. For my part, I erect the set and run the stage, but also put up 2 advertising banners on the main A road running past the village. This is where Bobby gets interested.
I was interested at the ballet stage, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. Ballet and an A road in one confession. How about that? On a sunny Sunday morning at the beginning of August 2016, I set out early with the car boot loaded. The first site is a relatively easy job with a convenient lay-by alongside to park up and set the banner up. The simple operation entails driving in a series of wooden stakes, hammering in some clips and cable, tying the banner onto them, and I'd done it in no time and I'd moved on to location 2. The banner looked fine. But unlike the easy first banner, the second location had no convenient parking. So as I turned into the lane off the main road, I continued to indicate and pulled hard over onto the verge as I had done every year before. As I turned off the engine, there was a loud and long blast of a car horn from behind, where it appeared a lady did not appreciate my indication and now needed to pull around me to continue her journey. I didn't consider I had inconvenienced anyone particularly and chose to ignore her outburst, which possibly contributed to the ensuing incident. As I started to exit my car, the lady in question quite aggressively swung around, continuing to gesticulate at me as she passed. I continued to ignore her efforts and proceeded to walk around the boot to start my task in hand. It was at the point that I reached the back of my car and turned to open the boot that I noticed she was clearly very upset with my persistence at ignoring her, and had stopped a little further up the road, thrown her car into reverse, and was starting to back up at quite a rate towards me. There's trouble afoot. With the benefit of hindsight, at this point I ought to have taken a breath, considered holding whatever conversation the lady wanted, allowing both of us to move on with our day. What I actually did was to carry on with my task, which persisted in giving the impression of me that I was completely ignoring my furious fellow motorist, and it was in the next few moments that the incident in question occurred. My guess is that however many confessions you've heard, you probably won't really know what's going to happen. As she screeched to a halt, released her seatbelt and began to exit her vehicle, I emerged from the rear of my car, out of the screen of the now raised boot, holding a sledgehammer in one hand and a 5-foot wooden stake in the other. As our eyes met, there was a brief moment of disbelief, followed by a quickly developing terror, neither of which I fully understood in the few seconds it lasted, until it was broken by a very rapid retreat to her vehicle, a slamming of the door and screeching of tyres as she fled, glancing in her mirror to see the hammer-wielding lunatic running down the lane after her. I was aware then how this must look, and in my head, the next logical thing to do was to chase after her in order to apologise and explain myself. Finally realising that this made me look even scarier and completely demented, I went back and very hurriedly erected the banner and fled the scene for fear of getting a visit from the local constabulary. It was the quickest and sloppiest installation I had ever seen. But As you might realise, forgiveness is needed on 3 counts. Not for the lady driver, who frankly completely overreacted to what was never really a problem in my opinion, and I hope may now have learnt a valuable lesson about the potential consequences of road rage. However, I do need to apologise to the banner supplier, who took a significant amount of the blame for supplying what I deemed was clearly a substandard product which tore free of its fixing so quickly in the coming days. I also want to say sorry to the unfortunate volunteer who had to go back to the banner just over a week later to refix my botched job and has been selected to erect the banners every year ever since. And thirdly, and most importantly, I seek forgiveness from the local vicar, who, on his way to prepare for morning service in his Fiat Panda, passed on this Sunday morning what must have appeared to be a scene from a vampire slayer movie. I am still haunted by his ashen-faced look of shock and horror, staring out of his passenger window and no doubt blaming himself for narrowly avoiding a collision with the lady's car as it fled at high speed. Though interestingly, the vicar passed by on the other side and didn't get involved, even though there was clearly a demented man with a sledgehammer in one hand and a 5-foot wooden stake in the other, planning who knows what. Anyway, it's Em from Kent. This is Joe Wiley.
I would imagine that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost weren't far away either. They would absolutely be in the movie, because this sounds like a scene from a movie. And it's okay to be sorry now and all apologies and all that kind of stuff, but at the time, I think rather stroppy and hot-headed and a little bit objectionable. So I think this can possibly be forgiven, because I think this is just a bad thing to have done. And to have scared this woman to death almost. So no, not forgiven.
Well, I think she was making quite a thing about it, don't you? She sounds like the kind of motorist who was just getting a little bit difficult.
I think they were both being very difficult.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Bobby has a judgmental face.
No, well, the thing is, I was just trying
Not
to think.
normally, but she has one on now.
It seems that you did the right things. You indicated. What I think happened is she assumed you were going to do something different. And as you went and parked up on the verge, it probably caused her to be, I don't know, cross or whatever, or annoyed with you, when actually it was her fault for not actually taking in what was happening in front of her, because she assumed you were going to do something else. So she's cross with you when she didn't need to. But also, if you'd have turned and spoken to her and sorted it out, it probably wouldn't have led to the kind of big reverse and the big dramatic gestures. So why didn't you listen to her? So she's bad for getting cross with you, but you're equally bad for not listening to her. You just ignored her. No one likes to be ignored. It's rude. So I think I'm not going to forgive you.
Oh.
Because you ignored her.
And you wielded a sledgehammer and a stake.
At the same time.
The Confessions Podcast.
So here's tonight's tale. It comes from Kath. Kath, thank you very much indeed for today's confession, which is topical, as you're about to find out. Simon and the Collective. It's always about this time of year, with the sun shining, so many global sporting events taking place. I am transported back several decades. We're going back to 1979, pretty much to when darts
Yeah, absolutely. Bang on.
relied on to do some hits on the telly. Having left school with no idea what I wanted to do in life, it made perfect sense to take over the job my older sister had just finished. So as she left France and returned to Scotland, I went off to France to work as an au pair, living with the family she'd been staying with. Life was idyllic. I lived in a large, sprawling farmhouse really deep in the French countryside. It was such a remote little village that only one bus passed through it one day a week. I came to know everyone in the village, and we very rarely had any visitors from outside, as it really wasn't on any tourist map. We had no shops. There was a little bakery in the next village, which I could reach in about 20 minutes on an ancient bike that was in one of the outhouses. It took me quite a while to master it. Getting on involved me leaning the bike against a wall, then climbing the wall and swiftly-ish taking off. I'm 5 foot and a little bit, says Kath. This bike was not only from the Stone Age, but also designed for a giant. The only way I could get on it was to tip the bike and myself sideways and hope for the best. I persevered, however, and often would freewheel down the steep hill to the next village. I wouldn't even attempt the hill climb on the way back, so I just pushed it slowly. Over time, I prided myself on discovering hitherto unknown paths and shortcuts, the most exciting discovery being the little overgrown path that I could take, which would take me out about a quarter of the way up the hill. I would then do my ritual of tipping off and walking the rest of the way up the hill to my village. One day I'd been out visiting a friend and was heading back home. The sun was shining and my legs were starting to ache. I didn't have too long to go though, as I had already reached my secret pathway and only had to get to the end of it before climbing off the bike and walking up the hill. I'd already decided I would have a little rest at the bottom of the hill when I noticed an elderly couple sitting by the end of the path with a small picnic. What a weird place to come for a picnic, I thought, followed by the fact that I would now have to cycle past them and round the corner onto the hill and out of sight before my disembarking ritual could commence, because it was rather embarrassing, as I have explained. So, Simon, I was slightly put out by this couple daring to picnic near my remote village. You can imagine how I felt then when I rounded the path onto the hill and discovered about 600 people lining both sides of the hill, picnic tables everywhere, wine, cheese, tablecloths. It wasn't only very puzzling, but when at the sight of me and my rust bucket they started clapping and cheering and shouting, "Allez, allez!" It was with a heavy heart and even heavier legs that I realised there was no way I could tip myself off this bike. I'd have to attempt something I'd never achieved before and cycle up to the top of the dreaded hill. So I pushed on and upwards, being cheered all the way. Excuse me. With about 50 metres or so left to climb, the cheers suddenly became deafening. Wow, I thought, they're really enjoying this. Unlike me. It was then I realised and I heard the unmistakable roar of a car's engine. Great, I thought. Bad enough that all these people are now here. Now I've got to contend with a car too. And how dare they start beeping at me? This is my private road. A quick look behind and it all became horribly clear. This was not just any old car. The correct term for this particular one on that particular day was, I now know, the lead car. You see, because I had used little hidden roads and paths to reach my destination, it meant that I'd avoided all the closed road signs and, quite by accident, had seemingly become an extra and unsubscribed participant in that year's Bourgogne stage of the Tour de France. With a strength that probably came from sheer embarrassment, my little legs took on a life of their own. Excuse me, as I had to get to the top of the hill, round the corner and into the farmhouse courtyard before the incensed car driver reached me. Amazingly, I managed it. It did cross my mind to demand a yellow jumper, as I'd surely earned it, but thought best to just lie low, and lie low I did. So I seek forgiveness, not from the crowds who had come to see the elite cyclists, as they still managed to see them. I got an added bonus when I appeared. I can understand the trouble the lead car driver would have gotten into had I not managed my super sprint to finish. That would have been a catastrophe had the real cyclists caught up with me, but they didn't, so no harm done. Where I perhaps should seek forgiveness is from my dad, himself an elite cyclist in his younger days, who competed in many similar events around Europe. One of his many titles won was the Scottish uphill champion. Had I listened a bit more to him about cycling techniques, I would probably have reached the top of the hill far quicker. Well, imagine that. Excuse me again. Kath.
You all right?
Yeah. So
Not really.
Kath finds herself at the head of the Tour de France and desperately trying to get out of the way on an old rust bucket, and she's only 5 foot. Young Joe.
Initially, I was getting images of Call Me By Your Name when you started to tell that story for some bizarre reason, it being in France and cycles and everything. There's nothing to forgive here, just enormous respect for climbing up the hill on your bike, and you absolutely deserved a yellow shirt at the end of it, and you were very much, I think, an uphill champion. So I just give you all the respect, and I think you have nothing to be sorry or to forgive.
Okay, what do you say, Bobby Pryor?
Well, here's the thing.
Moral compass of the nation.
The problem is,
What
of course,
did she do wrong?
I understand. She won the hill climb. She deserves a yellow jersey. In fact, though, Kath, I imagine your dad, like my dad, would be very, very cross with you. My dad is a cyclist. One of the things he used to get really cross about, and was brilliant to watch him get cross at, was people getting in the way of the cyclist. So you were potential getting in the way of the troop, because actually the impact is huge if someone is on that course and brings down, the peloton. That's huge. So I'm going to say, in memory of my dad, Kath, you are not forgiven.
Wow.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Kath's confession, You've Placed a Hill in My Heart, which features an Olympic cycling sprint that Mark Cavendish would be proud of. If you have missed any of the confessions going out live this past week, then you wouldn't have heard the reaction on the people's verdict. So here's another chance to hear what the people thought, the people's verdict to Kath's confession. And it sounds like she's not the only one to make this hilarious blunder. We have Simon from Budley Salterton. Forgiven, I had a similar experience with the Tour of Britain when I followed them down Peak Hill in Devon. I was about 5 minutes behind them, going through Otterton with crowds and crowds of junior school children cheering me on to catch up with the rest.
Seems like an easy mistake to make. Anyway, that's it from this week's batch of confessions. If you want to send one in, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. But don't go anywhere just yet, because it's time for our weekly trawl through the archives to dig out a confession from the crypt.
Yeah, and this one's been requested by Andrew, who says, I'm writing regarding a confession from the crypt that's been driving me slowly mad over the last few years. The confession probably occurred around mid-2015 and included the confessor, a number of council workers and an underground location. Sadly, I only heard the punchline to the tale, and the remainder of the story has occupied my thoughts ever since. Why were the council workers underground? Why was the confessor underground? How did their presence go unnoticed? Could you please play this confession and save me from my turmoil and forgive me for not contacting you sooner?
All those questions are about to be answered. Here for your listening pleasure is the one we called Batley Out of Hell.
The Confessions Podcast.
Gather round, here comes another drive time confession. Yours, always welcome, confessions@bbc.co.uk, and the podcast will be available tomorrow with all of this week's stuff on it. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, this comes from Mark Noble. I appear to have his full name, and so hopefully that didn't just escape, and maybe he's called something else. Anyway, Mark Noble. Back in 1998, Simon, my wife Wendy and I had a job inspecting culverts, stream channels, small tunnels under railway lines. Is very specific. This usually involved wearing wetsuits, helmets and lamps and crawling on hands and knees, taking photographs and videos as we went. This is very important work, Father Simon. I can appreciate that. We were given a job in Batley in Yorkshire and had a very... Is that just a thing? Been there.
Anything could happen in Batley. Okay. Great place that it is too. I love it.
Anyway, there we were. We had a very vague plan of where this particular culvert went. We wandered over the assumed route, which took us down an alleyway at the side of a graveyard. This is where we met the railway, which had a very distinctive cast iron footbridge over it. And lots of people going, yeah, I know. Pleasantries were exchanged with two council workers who were clearing leaves from drains alongside the graveyard wall, and we went to find the entrance to the culvert. Brackets, stream channel / small tunnel. We were soon underground and followed the culvert for several hundred metres to a place where a chink of daylight came through a gap between flagstones which formed the roof. Peering through, the cast iron footbridge could be seen in one direction, and in the other direction, the council workers were stood almost directly overhead, surrounded by all the graves of the graveyard. Various drain pipes entered the culvert at this point, and suddenly the gloved hand of one of the council workers appeared right at the side of us. He was just doing his job, clearing as many leaves as he could, and some of them fall down holes like this. He was just reaching for some soggy old leaves. Well, I'm afraid I couldn't resist. Suddenly, I reached out and grabbed his hand with a death-like grip and held on tightly. This was the climax of that fine movie, Carrie. Sorry, spoiler. But this was happening for real. The terrified shout of, "Something's got my hand!" was audible for miles. We could hear it underground, and to make matters worse, I then decided to start tugging. I pulled, he pulled back, I pulled even harder. Wendy, who was viewing this through the crack in the flagstones, watched the panic unfold as the other worker abandoned his mate and fled up the path. After a few more tugs, Wendy added an eerie moan from between the flagstones, and I then slowly released the poor man, stroking his hand, before he fled, howling and wailing, abandoning all their equipment. You can understand their point, really. So now is the time, really, to seek forgiveness from those two poor souls who were convinced that something from the graveyard in Batley had grabbed them, which it actually had. And also all their disbelieving friends and family who had to listen to their tale because their story is kind of true. And you can imagine they have been going around. You'll never guess what. I was clearing all that stuff from the graveyard in Batley, and something grabbed. Yeah, of course it did. No, it genuinely did. Well, here's the answer. It was Mike Noble and his wife Wendy, because that's what their job was.
Do you know, it's a difficult one because he could have ruined that poor man's life. I mean, some people, they're very sensitive souls, and he could have been one of them.
In Batley? You've not been to Batley, have you?
Okay, fine. In that case, it was very funny, and I'm going to forgive.
You are going to forgive. All right. Okay.
If Nigel says that they're all, hardy.
Tough. Okay, Nigel, go on then.
A variety of things can happen in Batley, and this was just one of them. My biggest worry was the mate might come back with a shotgun or something like that, because it's a big clay pigeon fraternity. But he didn't, fortunately. unfortunately. So the very noble Mark was got off, and I think it was basically okay. I think it was very funny. Maybe it has taken a number of years to tell him. I mean, he didn't have a heart job or anything like that, and his mate abandoned him. So it is incredibly funny, but they are made from granite in Batley, so I'm sure it's all very forgivable.
Let's see what Seth makes of all that. What do you think? What do you think, brother Seth?
A brilliant practical joke, particularly with the stroke of the hand at the end.
And the great thing about it, it's a practical joke. It wasn't planned. It was just spontaneous. The hand comes down. You're underground. You grab it. He's in a graveyard.
Yeah, I could just imagine being there, and I would have done exactly the same thing. So it has to be forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was your confession from the crypt this week, featuring Sister Rebecca, Brother Nigel, and Sporty Seth.
It's made me laugh a lot, this one.
I thought it was just terrific, and it was the fact, as you mentioned in the thing, the fact that it wasn't premeditated, because often pranks aren't as funny as the prankster always thinks. But the fact that he was just there doing his job, down comes the hand.
Just spontaneous opportunism, I think that's what it was called.
Exactly what it was. Enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, if you have a request for a vintage confession, then send us as many details as you can remember, including when it first went out vaguely, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to dig them out from the crypt.
And if you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet us the code phrase, which was, "Can I sniff your hair?" Which made sense in the context of last week. Big thanks to Sam and Neris and John and Ed and Michelle and everyone else who got in touch. This week's code phrase is, "There's a chipolata stuck to your passport."
When isn't there? That's pretty much it for this week. If you have something to get off your chest, then send it in. Please do to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and you can hear our show every day from 5 o'clock. This is Monday to Friday, obviously, on BBC Radio 2. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Bobby.
Goodbye.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.
Hello, I'm Mark Riley, and I'd like to let you know about Six Music's A to Z of Psychedelia box set, which I've made along with music journalist and fellow broadcaster Rob Hughes. We look at the world of psychedelic music from the mid to late 60s, an unpredictable but flowery beast often littered with ill-advised escapades and unintentional hilarity, which peaked with something they call the Summer of Love. Alongside music, we also explore the art, film and poetry of the psychedelic counterculture. The A to Z of Psychedelia is out now and available from wherever you normally get your podcasts. Turn on, tune in, but don't drop out.